The Tradesman's Entrance. London SW1 is a beautiful district of England's capital. It encompasses the bucolic St James's Park and Green Park, Buckingham Palace and the majestic Pall Mall. But for Sidney Bingley, it meant the slightly humbler areas of Pimlico and Victoria, where his self-built decorating business had enjoyed many lucrative contracts. And it was a pretty straightforward van drive from his home in Plaistow, stick to the East India Dock Road and follow the signs along the river to Westminster, and, if no carrying of equipment was involved, the District line would take you directly from Upton Park to Victoria. On either journey, Sidney always passed the premises of his very first building job, where he had been reduced to tears by torrential scolding, having been goaded into putting 5 sugars in the foreman's tea by his older colleagues, deliberately omitting to tell him that their boss was a diabetic. The recollection always made him smile, yet Sidney had never forgotten the screaming face of the foreman, and he had resolved from that very day forward only to work for himself. At the height of his career, Sidney Bingley Limited had shared a regular and lucrative contract at a sprawling purpose-built apartment block for retired military people overlooking the river in Pimlico. So when a contract came in, unusually with a full payment up front, from North Halkin Street, London SW1, Sidney was curious as to why the name wasn't familiar to him. On the day he was due to drop the tools and materials off at the premises, he drove via Westminster to Victoria, but then took the route along Grosvenor Place towards Hyde Park, turning off at Halkin Street. The view before him left Sidney open-mouthed. The sight of the magnificent, stately white buildings almost took his breath away. True London mansions in the Georgian style. Belgravia. Now, at just over 60 years old, Sidney allowed himself a chuckle of reward. He'd read of Belgravia and its ice-cream white mansions, but had never in his life had cause to pass through it before. He was well versed in the Victorian novels of Anthony Trollope and of Dickens. These magnificent Georgian buildings featured in the Palliser and Barsetshire novels, and although Dickens' Mr. Brownlow had lived in Islington, these palatial dwellings recalled for him the coziness of Dickensian Christmases, and occasions when the nobility of the house remembered the servants below stairs, and a heartwarming generosity prevailed around a crackling hearth. Of course, he had seen these resplendent crescents in Victorian melodramas on television, his favourite programmes, and, gleaming in the bright sunshine, it were as if North Halkin Street were bidding Sidney Bingley welcome. He checked the name and address on the delivery note, a Mrs. Cornish at 9 North Halkin Street. Sidney jumped out of his white van and beheld the immaculate stone stairway which led to a splendid portico with tall, thick Palladian pillars and a sparkling jet-black door, resplendent with highly polished brass fittings. Failing to notice the little iron gate inconspicuously grafted into the fine black wrought iron railings which led along a dark, narrow stairway to the basement, Sidney Bingley climbed the stairs proudly, as if he were about to enter a palace, and, as he placed his hand over the large round bell button, a sepulchral chime could be heard echoing on the other side of the door. He almost wished he'd thought to bring a bunch of flowers for the lady of the house. He had certainly been paid enough up front. He was about to push the bell a second time when the huge door was pulled slowly ajar, and the smiling Sidney was greeted by the sight of a lady with light brown tousled hair struggling into a dressing gown. Before Sidney could even speak, he saw her face flush as she barked, "What the devil are you doing at my front door?" Sidney couldn't believe what he heard and tried to smile. Get off! Get off these steps! They've only just been cleaned." "But, Mrs. Cornish, I'm—" "Lady Forbes Cornish, you clueless fool!" Sidney almost felt the blood drain from his face as he managed, "But I'm expected—" "Not here, you're not!" bellowed the lady. "You're expected below." And she gestured forcibly with her forefinger. "Down there!" And then she shouted again, as if he were hard of hearing. "Down there! This stairway isn't for the likes of you. Look at what you've done to my tiles." Sidney gazed down and saw the 2 dusty imprints from his pimple-soled training shoes. "You ignorant imbecile! Get off my doorstep!"